Can you give us a sense of your reaction to hearing, first of all, North Korea's claim that it had set off an H-bomb last night?
Well, that was pretty shocking because no one believed that they were that close, and yet they announced it. Of course, about a month ago, they said that they had succeeded with it. So we have to see what the data finally shows, but I think the locus of opinion at this point suggests that they did not succeed. That said, I think it's pretty clear that's their goal, and if they didn't exceed this time, they're a real believer in if you don't succeed the first time, you just try again. And so I think we have a very, very big problem with North Korea, and I think we're going to have to devote a little more bandwidth in Washington to dealing with it.
So whether it was a successful H-bomb test or whether it was an A-bomb test that they're trying to claim was something greater, in the real analysis, does it matter? Does it really tell us in the final analysis that North Korea is pursuing a nuclear program?
They are clearly pursuing a nuclear program, notwithstanding the fact that they committed in September 2005 to abandoning all their nuclear programs. So they have clearly repudiated their earlier affirmations and are now going forward. So the question is, what do we do about it? Now, to call for talks is one thing, but if you don't have any agreement on what was previously agreed to, then it's really an example of sort of talking to someone who clearly has some kind of memory loss. So what we need to do is to get them to sign up to talks on the basis of things they've already agreed, and there's no sign that Kim Jong-un is interested in doing that.
So few of us have any real understanding of North Korea, of the place itself, of Kim Jong-un. Tell us what you can to build our understanding of what he's about, what the country is about, what he's hoping to achieve with any of this.
Well, first of all, most of these talks were held in Beijing, but I did make a few trips to North Korea. This is about as sad a country as you can imagine. They have these sort of large buildings in downtown Pyongyang, but everything else is pretty rudimentary. They have these kind of odd apartment buildings way out in the countryside, and then you look closely and you don't see any windows. You just see some plastic where there should be windows. So this is a country of grinding poverty, but it's a country that has, since its inception following World War II, an absolutely brutal and tough dictatorship that has shown zero interest in real reforms. People always say, well, maybe they'll go the China route. The trouble with the China route is as soon as there's an opening in the society and people can peer into that neighboring state, South Korea, which is one of the real go-go countries of the world, I don't think there'd be too many people left in North Korea. So I think they have never felt that the reform option is really open to them because everyone would leave, and so they just grind along with this hideous dictatorship.
And, again, I think our impression generally is one that North Koreans don't truly understand the global picture in what their life is like versus someone in North Korea. Is it true that there's a real lack of understanding?
I suspect there is, but I suspect that when the country finally does change, and I don't believe that North Korea will be with us in this form forever, but I think it's quite likely that we'll talk to people who say, well, yes, we did know, but we kept it very quiet, kept it to ourselves because we didn't want to get arrested for that kind of talk. I mean, this is a real dictatorship. I mean, if they hear you talking to someone else about this kind of thing, that somehow life is better in South Korea, that's a very serious charge against you. So I have some experience in another part of the world, a little country called Albania, which had a huge, a very tough dictatorship under a leader named Enver Hoxha, and it was about as sad and hermetically sealed a country you could find. So when we opened up our embassy there following the opening up and talked to people there, it was clear that many of them knew what was going on, but simply weren't at liberty to talk about it at the time.
I read earlier today an article that you wrote last fall about North Korea and Kim Jong-un and sort of continuing the legacy of his family, but seemingly more brutally and with less real direction than his father or grandfather. And your vision, as you just mentioned, that you think North Korea will become a part of greater society at some point. It will have to open up. How do you see that happening, and what should the world be doing in the meantime to hasten that?
Well, obviously it is hard to predict what is the spark there. We know there's a lot of sort of combustible material that, as we know, we have a society that is in pretty much utter failure. Certainly the wealth they have is not widely shared at all. It's basically shared among families in Pyongyang who are part of this communist nomenclatura. So at some point there will be some kind of uprising, whether it's first a military coup or something. Very hard to tell. But then what we're going to have is 23 million people who many of whom want to leave. Then we have some 46 million South Koreans, many of whom want to come and visit. So that transition will be very tough to manage. There are those who say the South Koreans don't want anything of unification. I beg to differ on that. I think if North Korea were kind of out there with the dictatorship kind of somehow ending, I think South Koreans would suck it up and do their duty and figure out how they can absorb North Korea. The problem will be to make sure the Chinese understand that a change in political arrangements on the Korean Peninsula are not going to be deleterious to their own interests. And for that reason, I think the U.S. needs to have these kind of deep discussions with the Chinese to assure the Chinese that the U.S. would not try to take strategic advantage of North Korea's demise, would not be putting troops up on the Yalu River and things like that. And I think the first 100 times we say that to the Chinese, they probably won't believe us, but maybe it eventually will sink through.
Very briefly before I let you go, I mean, obviously we're looking at present day right now. Sanctions don't seem to have had much effective sway. Talk of new ones today. Effective in your estimation, or is there something else that needs to be done?
Well, you can't do nothing, and so I think sanctions in many such instances are employed, even though I think from an analytical point of view, they probably won't have a big effect in terms of getting a country to choose a different path. I think there's certainly evidence to suggest that the sanctions hurt average North Koreans a lot more than they hurt these fat cats in the government under this hideous regime. That said, I don't think we have much of a choice there, but I think in addition to sanctions, we need to look at how to kind of get closer to our neighbors, to our friends, that is, such as Japan and South Korea, make sure everyone understands that our security guarantees are really meaningful. And I think very importantly, we need to kind of reestablish some of the patterns of cooperation we had with China in the past. I think if the U.S. and China can work together, we can really move mountains. And yet the relationship is really bedeviled by a kind of lack of balance and lack of trust and a host of issues that I don't think can be solved anytime soon. So I think we have to do a better job of setting priorities there.
Mr. Hill, we thank you for your insights.
My pleasure.
Christopher Hill joined us from Denver.